Imagine defeating 10,000 men in combat and still being remembered as the woman no one could tame. This is the story of a princess who broke every rule written for her, a warrior who made kings kneel, and a legend so powerful it echoed across continents and inspired myths that still live today. But her story begins with a question that would change everything. The year is 1280. Central Asia is a powder keg of ambition, bloodshed, and empire. The Mongol Empire, the largest land empire the world has ever seen, stretches from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. Entire civilizations have been erased, cities reduced to ash, millions dead. And at the center of this world of fire and iron sits a young woman. She is tall, powerful, her hands scarred from years of holding a blade, her eyes fierce, unblinking, the kind that make grown men look away. She stands in a wrestling arena, surrounded by thousands of spectators, the roar of the crowd echoing off the mountains. And she has just issued a challenge. "Defeat me," she says, "and I will marry you. But if you lose, you owe me 100 horses." The crowd erupts. Men laugh, uncertain whether to take her seriously. Nobles whisper behind their hands. Her father, one of the most powerful Khans in the Mongol world, watches from his throne with something close to pride. Because this is not just any woman. This is Khutulun, daughter of Kaidu Khan, granddaughter of Ogadai Khan, great-great-granddaughter of Genghis Khan himself, born into a lineage of conquerors, raised in a world where strength is the only currency that matters. And she has just done something unthinkable. She has turned marriage, the one thing women are expected to submit to without question, into a battlefield. But here's the thing you need to understand. This isn't a joke. This isn't a symbolic gesture. This is real. Khutulun isn't just participating in wrestling matches for show. She is actually competing against real warriors. Men who have spent their entire lives training for combat. Men who have killed in battle. Men who would rather die than lose to a woman. And she is destroying them. One after another, challengers step forward, confident, proud, convinced they'll be the one to finally humble this arrogant princess. They never are. She throws them to the ground with such force that some can't get back up. She breaks their holds before they even realize what's happening. She moves like water, strikes like lightning, and when it's over, when the dust settles and the crowd roars, she stands alone, undefeated. By the time she's in her 20s, Khutulun has accumulated 10,000 horses. 10,000. Think about that. 10,000 men tried to defeat her. 10,000 warriors believed they were stronger, faster, more skilled. 10,000 times they were wrong. But this story isn't just about a woman who could fight. It's about a woman who refused to be what the world demanded she be. A woman who looked at an empire built on the backs of women's silence and said, no. And that kind of defiance, that kind of power, it doesn't come without a cost. To understand Khutulun, you have to understand where she came from. The Mongol Empire in the 13th century is not a gentle place. It's not a place for the weak, the hesitant, or the merciful. It's a world where children learn to ride before they can walk, where boys are given bows at age 4 and expected to hunt by 6, where survival itself is a daily test. And Khutulun? She was born into the heart of it. Her father, Kaidu Khan, is a legend in his own right. He is the grandson of Ogadai Khan, who was the third son of Genghis Khan. When Genghis died, he didn't leave the empire to his eldest son. He left it to Ogadai, because Ogadai was the smartest, the most capable, the most ruthless. And Kaidu inherited that same fire. But by the time Khutulun is born, the Mongol Empire is fracturing. Genghis Khan's descendants are fighting each other for power. Brother against brother, cousin against cousin. The empire that once moved as one unstoppable force is now cannibalizing itself. Kaidu refuses to bend the knee to Kublai Khan, who has claimed the title of Great Khan and moved the capital to China. Kublai has adopted Chinese customs, built palaces, surrounded himself with scholars and advisors. To Kaidu, this is betrayal. The Mongols are warriors, not bureaucrats. They are conquerors, not administrators. So Kaidu declares war. For decades, he fights against Kublai Khan's empire, leading his own confederation of tribes across Central Asia. He is a brilliant military strategist, a charismatic leader, and absolutely unyielding in his beliefs. And Khutulun? She grows up watching all of this. She watches her father lead armies. She watches men die in battle. She watches entire clans rise and fall based on a single decision. And she learns something crucial, something that will define the rest of her life. In this world, you are either strong enough to take what you want, or you are crushed. Now, Kaidu has many children, 14 sons in fact, 14 boys who are supposed to be his legacy, his future commanders, his heirs. But it's Khutulun he trusts most. Historical accounts describe her as his favorite. Not just because she's skilled, though she is. Not just because she's fearless, though she is that too. But because she thinks like him. She understands strategy, politics, warfare. She sees the board 3 moves ahead. And she can fight. Oh, can she fight? According to Marco Polo, who heard tales of her during his travels, Khutulun would ride into battle at her father's side. Not behind him, not in the rear guard. Right beside him, in the thick of combat, where the air smells like blood and horses in death. She would charge into enemy lines, identify a target, and then do something almost impossible. She would lean down from her galloping horse, grab an enemy warrior, and yank him off his mount. Mid-battle, mid-charge, like he weighed nothing. Then she'd drag him back to her father's side like a trophy. Imagine being a soldier on the opposing side. Imagine seeing this woman, this princess, thundering toward you on horseback and knowing, absolutely knowing, that if she reaches you, you're done. That's not just skill. That's psychological warfare. But here's what makes Khutulun truly extraordinary. She doesn't just survive in this world of men. She thrives. She doesn't hide her strength or downplay her abilities. She doesn't make herself smaller to make men comfortable. She becomes legendary. And legends always attract enemies. Let's talk about what it meant to be a woman in the Mongol Empire. Now, compared to many other societies at the time, Mongol women actually had it pretty good. They could own property. They could manage households. They had a voice in family decisions. Some even ruled as regents when their husbands died. But here's the catch. All of that power was contingent on marriage. A woman's value was measured by the alliances she could forge, the sons she could produce, the political capital she could generate for her family. Marriage wasn't about love. It wasn't even really about partnership. It was about strategy. And for a daughter of Kaidu Khan, for a granddaughter of Genghis Khan himself, marriage was a weapon. Every neighboring Khan, every ambitious warlord, every political opportunist in Central Asia wanted to marry Khutulun. Not because they loved her, not because they respected her, but because marrying her meant an alliance with Kaidu. It meant legitimacy, power, a claim to the Mongol legacy. Khutulun knew this. She knew that the moment she married, she would become a pawn. Her husband would control her. Her father-in-law would use her. Her children would be leveraged for political gain. Everything she had built, all the strengths she had cultivated, would be subsumed into someone else's ambition. So she refused. Over and over, suitors came. Princes, khans, warriors. Men who brought gifts, made promises, swore loyalty. And over, Khutulun said no. Her father, to his credit, didn't force her. Kaidu understood his daughter's value wasn't just in marriage. She was more useful to him as a warrior, an advisor, a symbol of his power. But the pressure kept mounting. Because here's the thing about refusing to marry in a society built on marriage alliances. People start to talk. Rumors spread. Whispers in the dark. Is she barren? Is she cursed? Is she secretly in love with someone inappropriate? Why would any woman turn down marriage unless something was wrong with her? And then there were the more vicious rumors. The ones that suggested her relationship with her father was inappropriate. That the reason she wouldn't marry was because she was too close to Kaidu. That their bond was unnatural. None of it was true. But truth doesn't matter when you're powerful and different, When you refuse to play by the rules, everyone else follows. So Khutulun did something brilliant. She turned the marriage question into a public spectacle.
Defeat me and I will marry you. But if you lose, you owe me 100 horses.
You want to marry me? She said. Prove you're worthy. Defeat me in wrestling. If you win, I'm yours. If you lose, you owe me 100 horses. To the men of the Mongol Empire, this seemed almost reasonable. Wrestling was sacred to Mongols. It was how disputes were settled, how hierarchies were established, how strength was proven. Every Mongol boy grew up wrestling. It was their national sport, their cultural identity. Surely, they thought, some man would eventually defeat her. But here's what they didn't understand. Khutulun wasn't just good at wrestling. She was exceptional. She had trained her entire life, not as a hobby, not as a novelty, but as a survival skill. She understood leverage, balance, momentum. She studied her opponents, identified their weaknesses, exploited them without mercy. And she was strong, not just for a woman. Strong, period. The first few challengers probably thought they'd go easy on her. You know, be gentlemen about it. Maybe let her save face. They didn't get the chance. Khutulun demolished them, threw them so hard they limped away in shame. And when word spread, when other warriors heard what happened, they came with anger, with determination, with the need to prove that no woman could be stronger than a man. She defeated them too, one after another, after another. And with each victory, her legend grew. Her herd of horses grew. Her power grew. But so did the resentment. Here's something you need to understand about being exceptional. The world doesn't know what to do with you. When you're too strong, too skilled, too confident, people don't celebrate you. They fear you. And fear always curdles into something uglier. For Khutulun, that ugliness came from every direction. Other nobles began whispering to Kaidu. Your daughter is embarrassing us, they said. She's making us look weak. She's refusing marriage, hoarding wealth, acting like she's above the natural order. This is dangerous. Some of Kaidu's advisors went further. They suggested that Khutulun's refusal to marry was destabilizing, that other women might start getting ideas, that the social structure itself was at risk if a princess could just opt out. You need to make her marry someone, they insisted, for the good of the realm. Even her brothers, her own 14 brothers, began to resent her. Because here's the brutal truth. Kaidu didn't just favor Khutulun, he trusted her more than any of his sons. He brought her to war councils, asked her opinion on strategy, listened when she spoke. And his sons? They watched their father ignore them in favor of their sister. Imagine being one of Kaidu's sons. You're trained from birth to be a warrior, a leader, a Khan. You've proven yourself in battle. You've done everything right. And your father still asks your sister what to do. The resentment festered. The brothers didn't openly challenge Khutulun because they knew they couldn't defeat her. But they talked, they plotted, they waited for an opportunity. And then there was the political reality. Kaidu was at war with Kublai Khan, the most powerful man in the world. Kublai had resources Kaidu couldn't match. Endless armies, unimaginable wealth, the backing of China itself. The only way Kaidu could compete was through alliances. And alliances in the Mongol world were forged through marriage. Every time Khutulun refused a suitor, she was potentially losing her father and ally. Every time she demanded another 100 horses, she was making enemies of powerful men who could have been friends. Kaidu knew this. Khutulun knew this. But she didn't bend. Because here's what she understood, what she knew in her bones. The moment she married, she would cease to exist as herself. She would become someone's wife, someone's political tool. Her strength would be transferred to her husband, her legacy absorbed into his. And she would rather die than let that happen. But the pressure kept building. Finally, according to historical accounts, Kaidu himself approached her, not with anger, but with weariness, with the weight of a man trying to hold an empire together while the world tears it apart. You need to choose someone, he told her. The nobles are losing patience. Your brothers are angry. And I need allies, daughter. I need this war to end. Khutulun looked at her father, This man who had never asked her to be anything other than what she was. And she made a decision. She would marry. But not just anyone. She chose a man named Abtakul. He wasn't a prince. He wasn't a Khan. He was one of her father's loyal commanders, a man she trusted, a man who understood her value and wouldn't try to control her. It wasn't love. It probably wasn't even romance. It was strategy. By marrying someone without significant political power, Khutulun ensured she wouldn't become a pawn in someone else's game. She wouldn't be used to forge an alliance she didn't want. She would remain herself, still fighting, still advising her father, still free. But even this careful, strategic choice came with consequences. Because the rumors didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. Why would she marry a nobody unless something was wrong? Why would a princess of her status settle for a mere commander? The whispers grew darker, more vicious. And Khutulun, for all her strength, for all her victories, couldn't fight rumors with a sword. Let's take a moment to talk about what Khutulun actually did in battle, because this is where the legend truly solidifies into something undeniable. The year is 1301. Kaidu is still at war with Kublai Khan's forces, though Kublai himself is old now, nearing the end of his life. The war has dragged on for decades, exhausting both sides, leaving thousands dead and nothing truly resolved. Khutulun is in her 40s by this point, no longer the young warrior princess, but a seasoned veteran. She has fought in dozens, possibly hundreds of battles. She knows the taste of dust and blood, the sound of dying men, the weight of responsibility, and she is still fighting. According to the Persian historian Rashid al-Din, who documented much of Mongol history, Khutulun was not just present at battles. She was a tactical commander. She led charges. She made strategic decisions. She was her father's right hand in ways that would have been unthinkable for almost any other woman in history. When armies clashed, when thousands of horsemen thundered across the steppes, Khutulun was there, not safely behind the lines, not observing from a distance, but in the chaos and the violence, in the place where one mistake means death. And she thrived there. Witnesses describe her riding through enemy formations, her horse's hooves pounding the earth, her armor gleaming, her face set in concentration. She would identify key targets, commanders, banner carriers, anyone whose death would sow confusion, and she would go after them. That technique Marco Polo described, where she would lean down and pluck enemy warriors off their horses, she did that in real battles, under real conditions, when arrows were flying and men were dying all around her. Think about the physical strength required for that. Think about the timing, the balance, the absolute fearlessness. You're galloping at full speed. There are thousands of people trying to kill you, and you're leaning down to grab a full-grown man in armor and yank him off his mount. That's not just brave. That's superhuman. But here's what's even more remarkable. Khutulun didn't just fight, she won. Over and over, Kaidu's forces held their ground against Kublai Khan's armies. And while it's impossible to attribute all of that success to one person, historical accounts make it clear that Khutulun's presence was a major factor. She inspired loyalty. When warriors knew Kaidu's daughter was riding with them, they fought harder. She provided tactical insight that turned battles, and she personally defeated enough enemy commanders that her reputation became a weapon in itself. Imagine being an enemy soldier and hearing that Khutulun is on the battlefield. You've heard the stories, you know what she's capable of, and suddenly this isn't just another skirmish. This is a fight for your life against a legend. That's psychological warfare at its finest. But war takes a toll, even on legends. In 1301, during a major campaign, something happened. The exact details are lost to history, fragmented across contradictory sources and time's cruel erosion of truth. But we know this much. Kaidu was injured, not just wounded, seriously hurt, the kind of injury that, for a man in his 60s who has spent his entire life in combat, is often fatal. And Khutulun? She was there when it happened. Did she fight to protect him? Did she carry him from the battlefield? Did she hold him as he died? We don't know. What we do know is that Kaidu Khan died shortly after that battle, and with his death, everything changed. When Kaidu died, Khutulun was in her 40s. She was famous, feared, respected by warriors across Central Asia. She had spent her entire life fighting beside her father, advising him, proving herself worthy of leadership. And by all logic, by all merit, she should have succeeded him. But the Mongol world didn't work on merit alone. Kaidu's sons immediately began fighting over the succession. 14 brothers, each with their own supporters, their own claims, their own ambitions. The confederation Kaidu had spent decades building started fracturing almost immediately. And Khutulun? She backed one of her brothers, a man named Orus. Why? We can only speculate. Maybe she believed he was the best choice. Maybe she knew the nobles would never accept a female Khan, no matter how qualified. Maybe she was tired. Maybe after a lifetime of fighting everyone else's expectations, she didn't have the energy to fight for a crown she knew the world would never let her keep. But here's the tragedy. Even her support wasn't enough. Orus didn't become Khan. The succession was contested, violent, bloody, and in the chaos, something happened that the sources only hint at. Something dark and sudden and final. Khutulun died. The exact circumstances are unknown. Some sources suggest she died in battle, still fighting even after her father's death. Others suggest she was killed by rivals, perhaps even by her own brothers. Some say she simply fell ill and died, exhausted by a lifetime of war. But here's what haunts me about her death. There's no grand monument, no elaborate funeral, no detailed account of how the great warrior princess met her end. She just vanished from the historical record. One moment, she's this larger-than-life figure, this woman who defeated 10,000 men, who fought in countless battles, who stood at the center of an empire. And then she's gone. As if the world didn't quite know what to do with her story. As if even in death she was too complicated, too powerful, too uncomfortable to properly memorialize. After Khutulun's death, Kaidu's confederation fell apart. His sons fought among themselves, weakening their position. Eventually they submitted to the Yuan dynasty, Kublai Khan's empire. Everything Kaidu fought for, everything Khutulun fought for, was absorbed into the very power structure they had resisted for decades. And Khutulun's name? It faded. For centuries, she was barely a footnote in history books, a curiosity mentioned in passing. Marco Polo's account was the most detailed, but even he didn't name her. He called her Ayuruk, possibly a title rather than her actual name. It wasn't until modern historians started digging through Persian and Mongol sources that the full scope of her story began to emerge. And even now, even with all our research, huge chunks of her life remain mysterious. There's a folk tale in Central Asia about a warrior princess. She's so strong that no man can defeat her. She sets an impossible challenge. Wrestle me and win, or pay the price. Suitor after suitor tries and fails. Sound familiar? That folktale spread. It traveled across trade routes, mutated through retellings, merged with other stories. It reached Europe, where it transformed into something else entirely. In the 18th century, an Italian playwright named Carlo Gossi wrote an opera called Turandot. The story? A Chinese princess who refuses to marry unless a suitor can answer 3 riddles. If they fail, they're executed. That opera was later adapted by Puccini, becoming one of the most famous operas in the world. Turandot has been performed thousands of times. Millions of people have heard that music, watched that story, absorbed that image of an unyielding princess who refuses to be tamed. And the root of that story? The seed that spawned all those adaptations? Khutulun. A real woman, a real warrior, a real princess who looked at an empire of expectations and said, "No, I will be who I am, and if you can't accept that, you can try to stop me." They tried. For her entire life, they tried. And they failed. Because here's the truth about Khutulun. She didn't win by conforming. She didn't succeed by making herself smaller or quieter or more acceptable. She didn't apologize for her strength or hide her ambition. She just was, unapologetically, ferociously, undeniably herself. And in a world that desperately wanted her to be something else, that was the most radical thing she could do. 10,000 horses. 10,000 men who thought they could defeat her. 10,000 times the world tried to put her in a box, and 10,000 times she broke free. Khutulun didn't leave behind a dynasty. She didn't change the political landscape of Asia. Her father's confederation collapsed. Her family's resistance failed. But she left behind something more valuable than power. She left behind proof. Proof that a woman could be the strongest person in the room. Proof that refusing to follow the script doesn't mean failure. It means courage. Proof that even in a world built to break you, you can remain unbroken. The Mongol Empire fell, the warriors died, the horses scattered. But the legend of a princess who wrestled 10,000 men and never lost, that legend is immortal. So here's my question for you. What would you do if the world demanded you be something you're not? Would you conform? Would you compromise? Would you make yourself smaller to make others comfortable? Or would you be like Khutulun, undefeated, unapologetic, and utterly yourself? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about power and gender and the weight of history in a new way, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten stories that shaped our world. Because there are so many more stories like Khutulun's out there. Stories that have been buried, forgotten, twisted into myths. Stories that deserve to be remembered. And I'm going to keep telling them. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.